Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today at the first panel discussion of the Finance Professional Show. We will be discussing whether or not we should finally consider a specialist finance qualification. I know this has been topical for a number of years, but it's definitely something I think it's time to really talk about again. So I'm really interested to hear what the panelists today have to say. I'm currently in the middle of writing a pretty in-depth cover story for the December issue of the magazine on this particular subject. I'm sure I've probably gone in touch with everyone here on the panel about it. But I'm really interested to hear what you guys think. So I'll do a little poll, a show of hands at the end on what you think of today's answers. I started writing about the bridging finance industry around 10 years ago. And even then, there were plans to create a formal qualification in bridging. I know Rob will probably speak a bit about that later. From the many conversations I've had with industry professionals over the last few weeks and bring this up for this feature that I'm writing, most people who've got back to me are in favor of it. And it would be a positive enhancement to an increasingly professional industry. So it could also encourage the next generation to grow and develop with this specific market. It always seemed odd to me that almost in every other industry, there's a qualification or some sort of formal training. But in the specialist finance industry, there isn't, because it's highly unregulated. But I find this strange considering there are quite hefty transactions in this particular market. It's obvious that brokers who are more educated in specialist finance will offer better advice to their clients, and it will help maintain better standards across the sector. The market's always changing, and therefore it's vital that brokers are continually learning to provide the best advice for their clients. There's a question later about this in particular. I've always been confused on what the disadvantage would be of having a mandatory qualification. However, when you start to unravel this, it tends to be about how it can be enforced. And if one lender doesn't do it, then will all lenders do it? So that's something which we'll also be discussing today. Would lenders desperate to get money out the door reject business from an unqualified introducer? Perhaps not. Without the whole industry adopting this, it would create an unlevel playing field. So I'm sure that's something we will talk about. Yesterday, we actually announced that two leading associations in our sector, favour and Astle, have teamed up with the LIBF to create an educational program for new specialist finance entrants, both lenders and brokers. The demand is clearly out there for a recognised course to weed out the uninformed. And currently, the associations don't have plans to enforce the course. And therefore, are we simply back to square one, or is it a good stepping stone to get people educated? So I'm interested to hear what people have to say on that as well. We only have 45 minutes for this discussion, so I'm probably going to cut it there and get everyone to briefly introduce themselves. So, Emily, do you want to start first?
No worries. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Emily Machin, Head of Specialist Finance and New Build at Interbay and Precise, also Kent Reliance. Thank you very much for Beth for having me here today.
Thank you.
Hello, Rob Jutt, Group CEO of the Bright Star Financial Group. Can you hear us in the back okay? Is that better?
Hi, I'm Neil Molyneux from Masterhaven Bank. I'm Head of Sales for Specialist Lending and Development.
Hi, I'm Juliette Babulal, a partner in the Real Estate Finance Department at Seddons LLP.
My name is Piragash Sivanasan. I'm the founder of Totem Finance. I'm also a former corporate banker with no real formal qualifications.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm director at Pilotfish and head up their property finance team.
And I'm Dimitri Zapjala, Managing Director at Avamore Capital.
Hi, and I'm Stephen Todd, Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder at Vast Group.
And those that don't know me, I'm Beth Fisher. I'm the editor of Bridging and Commercial and Development Finance today at the publishing house MediaNet. Our stand is just there if anyone wants to pick up a magazine on the way out. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, which is all about how the level of professionalism in this particular market has increased over the years. But can the same be said for the level of education for brokers in terms of competency and understanding of the market? Dimitri, do you want to kick us off with an answer for that one?
Yes, certainly. So I think broadly, yes. Competency has increased. I think understanding and education has kind of have to increase over that time. But there are undoubtedly still gaps within that. And actually, I think it's maybe a bit unfair just to put it down as the broker level. I think the industry overall, so I include ourselves as lenders, valuation partners, legal partners. I think as an industry, it's got much better, but there are definitely still gaps in there across everyone.
Would you agree that there are gaps as well, Alice?
Yeah, I think there are gaps, but I think it's pertinent to remember that in every industry you're going to get gaps, and you're going to get people that are far more competent than others. But I do think we have come on heads and shoulders over the past few years.
Emily, what's your experience? Do you feel that all brokers have the same level of understanding of the market?
No, but to be honest, I don't think they do at all. I think it's really difficult to kind of judge whether somebody is good, as a broker or as a lender or as a valuation partner. I think other industries have much more kind of heavily regulated qualifications before they can actually start doing the job. But just again, because you've got qualifications doesn't give you the experience or the life experience that you might necessarily need to actually be the best broker that you can be. So yeah, definitely it's moved on, but we've still got more work to do, I think.
Rob, what would you say makes someone qualified to work in specialist finance?
Well, I'll answer that question second. I'll answer your first question first. Has it moved forward in the last decade in terms of qualifications and professionalism in the industry? No. Hopefully that's straight enough. It hasn't. It's gone backwards. And the reason it's gone backwards is because the ultimate financial crack is there of the 2% procuration fees for every single advisor out there who has maybe never done bridging loans and all of a sudden is hugely motivated to be a bridging expert, even though they've perhaps never done a bridging loan ever before. And the bullshit and bravado is there on steroids right now. So absolutely no, it hasn't. And this is a critical point. What was the second question?
How do you judge someone if they're qualified in specialist finance?
Okay, so there's two markets here, right? There's the regulated market that I think we all agree is functioning really, really well at the moment because you have to be qualified. You have to have CMAP. You have to be FCA authorised to be able to give advice. And the result of that is it works seamlessly well, no surprise. And then you've got the other side, the non-reg side, the dark side, which is still, I'm afraid, in a lot of cases, like the Wild West. And I would guarantee I could walk around there today in this wonderful exhibition centre with a bridging loan lead on non-regulated. And the first, second, third, fourth, or even fifth thing I won't be asked is, am I authorised? What's my status? Who am I? No, it will just be, yes, we can do that. And that is absolutely still wrong in the industry. So all that's happened in 10 years is the platform of distribution has multiplied. The ability to lend has multiplied. So everybody that comes into the market, non-reg, quick yield, quick returns, with no long-termism at all. And that's a real concern. So we can't sugarcoat it. It's absolutely crossroads. And what we do now in the next 5 years will define our legacy in this world.
Thanks for that, Rob. Puragash, would you agree? Do you think it's a concern?
I think the first thing, going to Rob's point in terms of where we've been to, because the bridging market in particular and development wouldn't have got to today's levels. We're talking about an industry that was languishing in and around 100 million a year. Today we're talking about a £5 billion industry, and that hasn't happened without brokers. The EMY study done recently has said brokers are still one of the most important intermediary channels, which says that actually this market wouldn't exist within brokers. Now, what I do also agree is, and I was talking just before, is that the industry does have a reputation problem. So if I was in the bar and I met two people, one person was an accountant, said, hello, how are you? One person was a solicitor, I said, how are you? So what do you do? I'm a broker. Immediately, eyes glaze, because of what Rob said, is that you're money grabbing, this is all about these opportunities. And I think the wider debate is, I actually don't think that the average broker wants to be rubbish. I think the average broker does want to add value. And this is where maybe a qualification, and the debate is where we pitch that qualification, can help someone, give them a pathway to start, at least reach a certain level of competence.
Definitely. Juliet, what would you add to that from a legal perspective?
I think it's really important to say that you can't paint everyone with the same brush. I've met some excellent brokers out there who know their stuff, but there are ones who I think don't quite understand the processes, and that's where you get a mismanagement of expectations, or you have a mis-selling of a particular product because they don't quite understand maybe the lender's processes. But I think that brokers as a whole, as you've said, they've got a reputation. And when you're in partnership with others, so when I look at a legal transaction or a loan transaction, I see everyone as a link in that chain.
Yep.
We're all part of everyone's branding. And so if I'm sort of connected to a broker or a lender, I want that brand to represent me, or I want my firm as a brand to represent you. And so it's really important to get that right. And perhaps, as Rob has said, there is a need for long-term accountability, because far too long you've got a deal, people get their commission, and then they're just out of the equation.
Yeah.
We as solicitors are on the hook for 6 years after you've completed that. We've got PI, and we're always on the hook. So I think other parties within the transaction need to have that level of accountability, and then you'll have less mis-selling or misrepresentation. And I think that's something that we need to look at from a qualification perspective and from a regulatory perspective.
It's a really good point. I was actually having this conversation with another third party yesterday, and that fees also come into account when you talk about this. If someone was qualified, do they get the full fee? Right, as someone who's just introducing business who's not qualified, do they get a lesser fee? I think that's something which could also be something to talk about during this discussion. Stephen, despite being a largely unregulated market, should there be a bar to entry for new bridging lenders, brokers, and also third parties?
I think that the market has grown so much in the last 10 years, and the sophistication of the type of property. I'm coming from a property and valuation sort of experience and what I'm talking about now. And the sophistication of these properties has got more and more, and I think brokers are at the front and the gateway of this and receiving it in, and behind it you've got your valuers, you've got the legal side, all. So I think putting the correct, packaging things properly, getting the correct information through, I think is absolutely fundamental. I think we get approached every day by new lenders to the market, and there are reservations on our side because no one wants to lose money, no one wants to sue anybody. So I think doing things right. So I think the education-wise is what we're going to push at VAS with brokers to try and whether you can get a qualification, I'm not sure, but I think helping them and to pass on experience that they get. And so I think there could be a minimum entry level, but we as a business are unregulated. VAS panel is, VAS audit is regulated. What can we do to demonstrate we're doing things properly? So I think it's every broker's responsibility to be adding experience and skills to their teams and businesses to make sure they're getting things right.
Absolutely, and it's something which is constantly evolving as well. It's not like you would do a qualification and that's the end of it. It's CPD and just making sure that you continue with that. Neil, do you agree that there should be a bar to entry, and what would that bar look like if you do agree?
I think there's always going to be a bar at the end of the day, because if you're lending money in this marketplace, whether on a regulated or non-regulated basis, surely the bar is going to be, have you got a viable business model? Is your business model out there in the marketplace? Are people buying your money? And more importantly, or just as importantly, are they paying you back at the end of the term? Because if you're lending recklessly at the start, that's fine. How are you going to get your money back at the end of the process in order to lend it? And I think that's the important thing with introducers. We talk about them selling money all the time, but what about actually that money coming back in? Are they involved in that transaction? And is the transaction safe? And are they actually giving advice? Whether it's regulated or non-regulated, somebody comes to you and says, I would like to borrow money to do a certain transaction. You then have a responsibility to them, either by regulatory responsibility or even a moral responsibility that's non-regulated, to look after them. They are paying you predominantly for a service. The lender is going to be paying you, and the lender wants to know they're lending safely and that that money is coming back in at the end of 12 months. And I think that's the important thing with either a regulated or an unregulated introducer. So you talk about the bar surely is, do they lend responsibly? Are the clients borrowing responsibly? And is the money coming back in at the end of the term on time?
Yeah, and I guess that comes down to what Rob said at the beginning is, what questions are lenders asking brokers, and also vice versa, what are they asking lenders in terms of accountability, responsibility, and how they work together?
Yeah, so the only thing I want to pick up on that is that while I agree with a lot of the sentiment, yes, when we're advising clients, they should absolutely understand what they're getting into. But I also disagree potentially with the idea that credit risk should really sit with the lender. Ultimately, the lender will have their own risk profile, will have their own understanding of what risks they wish to take. Yes, the introducer should make sure the borrower truly understands what they're entering into, but I also don't completely buy into the idea that getting the money back is not actually the introducer's job. It's obviously a part of it in terms of subtly, you want to make sure that you're introducing the right lender to the right borrower on the right project, but still, I wouldn't like to see a move where credit risk is moved on to the broker, maybe rather selfishly perhaps, but
it's an interesting point, and I think that, obviously it's the lender's responsibility. I think maybe what Neil might have been saying, in my opinion, maybe the broker should be working with their client throughout the whole transaction. I know Rob was shaking his head a bit, so.
Yeah, it is the broker's responsibility to get a facility paid back on time. That is the basic requirement of a good broker. And this is where the problem is. And no disrespect to your business, but I don't know what you do at any point. But we will always make sure every single loan we do that client has the means to repay that back. Exit strategy is the first thing you ask. What is your exit strategy? And you sense check that. And actually, if I'm a lender, I wouldn't be wanting to work with brokers that can't show me how they're going to get people out and spend a lot of the time during the loan servicing giving updates on how that's going to happen. And do you know why? The biggest thing is if we deliver and we get that client to redeem on time, we've done our job correctly. And then we get a line of credit next time with these guys. And also, the other thing, this is really controversial, we do another deal. We do an exit, which means we earn again. So we have a vested interest to make sure that the one thing we do well is we work with that customer from day one that they complete on that loan to get them off that, and that's essential.
Well, if your clients do well, then you do well because it's repeat business.
And can I say, if you ask lenders, do brokers do that generally? They'll say they don't, I guess.
I think, yeah, absolutely.
You've got to say that now.
Far be it for me to disagree, but I agree.
They don't.
Emily, earlier you obviously talked about that there's no kind of standardization in terms of how qualified brokers are in the market. So do you think that a specialist finance qualification of any guise would be beneficial to improve standards? Would you be for this?
I think going back to my earlier point, anybody can leave school and go do a CMAP qualification. Does that make them a good broker? No, not necessarily, and it potentially could be the same with the specialist finance qualification, but is it going to hinder business? No, I don't think that it will. I think any form of education, any form of accreditation is going to help knowledge ultimately. But back to Rob's point, as a lender, we are looking at the quality of the broker who we are doing business with, and we are looking at exit strategies, and we have a responsibility as a lender to do that, but we do have a responsibility to make sure our brokers are doing that as well, and we only want to work with people that are going to kind of fit within our values. And I think new lenders coming into the market is always a good thing. It serves areas of the market that are not currently served. It creates competition for the existing lenders. But the question I would be asking to new lenders coming in is your business, as you said, have you got a sustainable business plan? Is it TCF? Are you doing the best thing for the customer? Are you kind of benchmarking yourself, from a quality perspective against other lenders that are already out there in the markets?
Yeah. Alice, I know you do quite a lot of educational pieces to your audience, your clients. Do you think that there should be a qualification, and also how would that be shaped?
It's a difficult question, and a standalone qualification is never going to make somebody competent. So you look at CMAP, for example, anybody can do those exams. They're multiple choice, they're relatively straightforward. They give you a solid foundation of understanding and understanding basic concepts, but you then have to get your competent advisor sign off, and that is the crucial part, demonstrating that you are competent. And experience is as crucial in this industry on making a broker a good broker as a qualification. Now, a qualification will prove to be a solid statement of intent. So if a broker is willing to do a qualification, it's that next statement to say, look, I am doing something towards building my knowledge and building my understanding. But I don't think we want to fall into the trap of brokers being able to do a qualification, going to hit, yes, hottest broker around now, I can broker any deal because I've done this one qualification.
And no experience.
You have, exactly, with no experience. You have to take it all the way where you do a qualification, then brokers prove their competencies, and those standards are upheld by everybody in the industry, so by the lenders, by fellow brokers, by regulatory bodies, or even by kind of the industry bodies that exist at the moment. And without 100% from everybody, it isn't going to make a significant impact, in my opinion.
It's an interesting point there. You know, you've got a lot of brokers in the market who are very experienced but may not have a qualification, but have been around for a long time and know the cycles, for example, and know the market inside out. So do you guys think that it should be something for new entrants only or for everyone?
Everyone.
I
just want to say it depends on what the qualification looks like. And within every brokerage, you should have checks and balances to monitor your staff, to monitor the brokers, and monitor their competencies and what needs to be tweaked. You know, having some sort of qualification may mean shadowing a lender and understanding their processes. You know, not necessarily going to a course and you know, that sort of formality. It may be something very informal, or having a mentor within the business to then understand, you know, this is how things are done, you know, if you've got an issue, you know, and then the level of accountability. So how do you assess that qualification? So it's not just, I mean, we've got, in my profession, you've got professional negligence claims all the time because people aren't doing what they're supposed to do and they're qualified.
Yeah.
So having a qualification does not necessarily mean it does what it says on the tin. We need to label brokers so that we're aware that, you know, this person has a certain competency, but also they need to be accountable. And I think that's an individual brokerage, a decision for individual brokerages.
Sure.
I think the other point I would say with regards to new starters and people with experience is that with the changes of working practices, you've got a lot of new starters who are working at home. They're not learning from the guy or the girl next to them that's giving them that experience. So actually, it might be useful to have a qualification that gets everyone to a theoretical standard. You're then talking about getting the culture right to ensure that the way in which, just because they've got the qualification, ensuring that we are delivering for the client, delivering for the lender, etc. I think it's putting those two things together. I think the other point about mature people with experience is, I think we shouldn't worry so much about the individual brokers. I think we should ask the question, which is, where do we want the industry to be? Should there be a gold standard qualification? And you don't need to make it mandatory. Let the market decide. If the qualification is excellent, for example, whether it's the CFA in the past or becoming a chartered accountant or becoming a solicitor, eventually there is a flight to quality. In very much the same way that the regulated market became very early on. So I think if the industry as a whole I think they should set a bar high and then let the market decide whether that's something that will add value.
If it's not mandatory, do you think that people will take it though?
Well, no, it's a complete and utter waste of time. If you don't... Is that me?
Are we good? Go ahead.
I'm scared to speak now, actually. If you don't make it mandatory, people won't do it. Number one. Number two, if lenders don't insist that people are qualified to do business, whether it's mandatory or not, it won't work. And the reason I know that is 5 years ago, that's what we did. We got everything ready on the launch pad. The Ocean vessel was built, it was ready to be launched, and the lending community bottled it. They bottled it. And the reason they bottled it is because there was enough of that community that went, you know what, we only work in the non-reg business. We're doing okay at the moment. Actually, if we drive some professionalism in this industry and we get people qualified and we get rid of all the rubbish, our business might suffer.
Yeah.
Well, that's not acceptable. And actually, the problem is, in the non-regulated market, who regulates that? The trade associations, with respect, Adam, you do a great job, but no one does. It is the Wild West. So unless you make a qualification mandatory, and unless you make that mandatory qualification an entry requirement to do bridging, you are wasting your time. Pointless. Pointless. You will not get... We'll be talking about this in 10 years' time, like we talked about this 5 years ago. Why would you not want more professionalism, better qualified, better educated, brighter, more moral people in an area where clients are naturally vulnerable because they're paying higher interest loans?
Yeah.
Why? It's crazy.
I'm interested to know the lenders who are sitting up here, what they think about that. Would this be something that they'd like to enforce if all other lenders followed suit?
Yeah, I'll happily answer that. 100%. So I've always been a big advocate of the qualification generally. The fear, which I understand, is that it's change. Now, I was in the mortgage industry in the early 2000s, and I remember a very similar journey, actually, when people had to become qualified. I forget the name of it, but unless you were qualified by a certain date, and it was date stamped 2 years out, you could not do business. And I remember the initial uproar. I've done this for 50 years. I know what I'm doing. Why do I need a qualification? It shouldn't apply to me. And unfortunately, it was forced upon them. And actually, all we saw happen was that most people cracked on and did it. And actually, those who weren't willing to do it, I guess, on the back of what Rob said there, actually, if you're not willing to do that qualification, should this be an industry that you're in? But again, going back to the point of taking it further than just brokers, I think across the entire industry, it should be an expectation. And I wouldn't think it fair if there's a qualification that's expected of a broker that the lender they're speaking to doesn't have exactly that same qualification. So for me, I don't think it's a standard just for brokers, but across the whole market, it's 100% should be mandatory. Yes.
I think for me, to be a valuer, you've got to be a chartered surveyor, you've got to have so much experience demonstrating it, tests, exams. We don't let any valuer, less than they've got more than 2 years post-qualified experience, to do valuations for any of our clients, because it's in the specialist lending sector. Properties are more complex, you can make mistakes. We want to make sure these things are done properly. I echo what Rob's saying. I think the more professionalism and the more education, I think about, especially property education, because the brokers are the gateways. I think it can help, and there's always been a disconnect between valuers and brokers, and I think when valuers are trying to tell brokers why something is, dare I say the word, downvalued, enough kind of worms, it's hard because you're not talking apples with apples. So I personally think that it would be good to do that. I think it'd be very, very difficult.
So you're a valuer and you're a lawyer, okay, and you're highly qualified people. So if I came into your industry and became a lawyer with any qualifications, would that not worry you a little bit?
Absolutely.
Right, and the same with you. So why am I allowed to? Why is this industry, why is this sector any different? You're heavily regulated, and the quality of the legal world in the UK is very, very strong. And the same for valuers. But with us, it's still the Wild West. And it always will be until we make this mandatory.
One big thing for me is getting your qualifications, one thing, but it's experience. Like a lot of valuers can't value a lot of this. I mean, 50% of our business is resi, and the rest of it's sort of office, specialist, leisure. You need 10 years under your belt to be able before you really understand this stuff. So I think it's the basics, isn't it? It's the entry point, really.
That's the whole point. It's the bar to entry and what that looks like. But again, that doesn't mean that they're the most experienced person in the community if you've got a qualification. I assume the reason why we haven't got to this point of adopting a qualification is because it could hinder business. So what do lenders think about this in terms of qualifications? Why wouldn't we have one, and why don't we have one at the moment?
I think that's a fantastic question. Why don't we have it? And if you've got a scenario where, so we work in a predominantly regulated market. That's where most of our business comes from. So we get some comfort from that. But look at it from the perspective of, so what you're saying is, we're trying to enforce this, but why wouldn't the individual want to have at least a minimum level of knowledge? I would question an advisor, if we're going to call them an advisor, an introducer, who wouldn't want to have a minimum level of knowledge. So what we're basically saying is, you could be working in Carphone Warehouse on a Thursday, have your leaving party on a Friday, recover over the weekend. On Monday, with the correct authorizations, I'm now a broker. I'm going to talk to somebody potentially about a 2, 3, 4 million pound deal. It's never going to be for a couple of £100. Let's be honest, it's going to be for several thousand or millions. You're going to sit in front of an individual and say, guess what? I want to charge you this much money because I am an expert. But last week you were selling iPhones. No, but today I am an expert because nobody says I can't be. So I think the bigger question is, as a property professional, why wouldn't you want to have a minimum amount of knowledge to provide your clients with a good service or a minimum level of service?
I think unless it comes down to the mandatory focus, if brokers, if you're having to invest in your staff, for example, at a brokerage to all do the qualification, but then there are other brokers who don't have this qualification, but they're still introducing business to a lender, what incentivizes everyone to do it? And I think it does need to come from the top down. Emily, what would you say about that? What's the onboarding process for brokers is very important.
I would largely agree, 100%. And I think, again, this probably comes back to the lender and how regulated they are in the market and the lender's own standards. So from our perspective, whilst, okay, we don't insist brokers to be CMAP qualified or regulated or whatever, they do go through a very, very stringent onboarding process, and every single one of our brokers does that. And, you know, the Carphone Warehouse employee who is now a broker on a Monday most likely wouldn't be able to do business with us for that reason. What we actually want to do is work with broker partners, distributors, firms like Brightstar, among others, that are experienced, qualified in their own right to do that kind of business.
What would happen to unqualified brokers if this was mandatory?
They go back to Carphone Warehouse.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to bear in mind and to remember is that if you are a brokerage who adopts this philosophy and you take your advisors through a minimum standard, then that becomes part of your initial conversation. I am qualified, I hold this qualification, which means I am able to talk to you about this. If you decide to talk to anybody else, please, please, please make sure that they have this qualification. It's exactly the same as somebody being quoted a fee which makes them gasp a little. They pick up the phone, they speak to 2 or 3 more people, and they establish if that's the industry norm. So I think it's really important to remember that the customer here can play a vital part in actually making sure that this is something that becomes important purely by asking, and for brokers and advisors to talk about it and to shout about it. And I think that's really important to remember.
Do you guys agree that if there was a qualification, whatever guise it would be formed under, it would, while it would focus on the specialist finance market, it would also focus on the wider industry as well, because that could potentially help with exits, plan A, plan B, plan C.
And all of that, So a qualification mandatory is just one part of it. The other part of it, which is inextricably linked, is regular activity in this product area. If you've got a qualification but you're doing one bridging loan every 2 years, you're as unqualified as someone who's got the qualification. So in equity release, in protection, in some regulated areas, there is KPIs saying that you have to produce a live transaction every month, every 2 months, every 3 months. That is equally as important. In qualification being mandatory and lenders having to do it is great. That's a real start. But having KPIs where you regularly are involved in that market and you therefore can give the right advice is as essential as a qualification.
It helps with the credibility of the firm that you're dealing with, because they're regularly involved, they're experts, they know what they're doing. But equally, I do think that consumers need to be educated to understand, listen, you've got unqualified brokers out there. It's a broker's obligation to say to a consumer, I'm unqualified and these are the risks. You're not protected and I'm not necessarily going to be accountable for anything I sell to you. And I think consumers aren't aren't as aware as we think they are. So perhaps more needs to be done to make them aware of this.
Oh boy, yeah, it's a really good point. We have some minutes left to go do a quick Q&A. We do have live questions from the live stream, which I'm sure will come up on the screen shortly. So let's go straight into that one. Make certificates in business banking and conduct mandatory for specialist finance along with CMAPs. Exemption may be relevant degree holders. Business accounting and or economics. Okay, so I'm assuming they're grouping them all together. Please note that level 3 is GCSE equivalent, so a decent degree supersedes the technical level. I'm not sure if that was a question.
I would pitch in here though and say, for example, I've got an economics degree. That is not relevant to what I'm doing whatsoever. I learned nothing in economics that helps me with being a commercial finance broker. I've also done CMAP. Again, there's crossover, but doesn't help you with bridging, development finance, nothing. I've also done my RICS down the property finance route, which not many people know about. Again, great for theoretical, bugger all with the actual application. So I think if you're going to do a qualification, you can't make exemptions like this. It has to be for what we do, and the experience and the competency must be demonstrated, as well as showing that you've got a nice shiny certificate.
This is great for add-ons. This is great to say, you know, I've got some wider knowledge and perspective of different things which are relevant. But like you say, that there needs to be something that's very specific on specialist finance. Does everyone agree on that?
Absolutely, but it doesn't make up for the life experience. And I think you mentioned at the beginning, the competent advisor status. Anyone can go out and get that qualification. It does not mean that they are going to be good at that particular job.
I think from my point of view is all these qualifications that have been tried, tested, been around for years. To introduce something brand new takes time. I think for me it'd be specialisms, development, finance, care. I think ISO's been around a long time and they've got different parts of the ISO. People sign up to that and say I'm a specialist in these different areas, and I think those are the development finance are one of the major areas where lenders will lose money, and that's the highest risk. So try and demonstrate a way we're trying to protect them by having those specialisms on that side.
Yeah. But 5 years ago, when I was chairman of the OBP, we got a scheme of work approved by the IFS for a bridging qualification that was only about bridging. Every part of it, from the originations to the servicing to the way interest is charged, every component part was ready to go. And the FCA, yeah, absolutely all over this. But the one group that stopped it was the lenders. Present company excluded here, was the lenders. It's all ready to go. Mandatory, the lenders stopped it.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Just wait for the microphone to come over to you. It's got Andrea here.
Thank you. So, as someone who has done like a bunch of courses not related to finance, some of them are purely on paper just to have that thing on your CV. They're not of any quality at all. So my question would be, how would you ensure that if this qualification for brokers actually happens, how can we ensure that it's of actual quality and it actually educates brokers to do quality deals?
I'm not sure if you just heard the response I gave 45 seconds ago, but I'll repeat it again if you didn't. You simply need to get a qualification that matches the skill set and the need and the knowledge base for this industry. It's not difficult to do. Adam, you did it for commercial finance. It's not difficult to do. It's there. You just get a panel of brokers and lenders together, and there's your syllabus.
Thank you.
Any more questions? We did have one over here.
I think I would hesitate to disagree with your man Rob under any circumstances, but I would like to say I thoroughly agree with you as regards bridging, because 15 to 20 years ago I did, as part of the advanced CMAP, a couple of papers on commercial finance. No lender gives a toss that I have some basic qualification attached to commercial finance. So on the one hand, I agree about the lenders.
Well, they're doing a regulated market.
Oh, they do in the regulated market.
Yeah.
Of course they do in the regulated market. Not non-regulated market, it's not an issue at all. And I think the more little qualifications that anyone can get, to spike their interest in a particular field is useful on its own. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Yep, actually, Adam at the back.
It would be remiss of me if I didn't say anything. But so what we're doing, we're actually picking up on the work that was done 5 years ago, which obviously I was involved with Rob at that time. Rob carried the torch and we were nearly there. We're now working with the IFS, or the LIBF as they're called. We're picking up on that same work. But the key to all of this is these guys out here. If the lender supports it, it will work. If you have some lenders that will still accept business from brokers that aren't qualified, it's not going to work. So they are the key to it, and that's the reason why we've engaged the Association of Short-Term Lenders as well, alongside favour. So we're all talking about it together as an industry. Whether you're solicitors, valuers, lenders or brokers, we all need to work together.
Yeah, agreed. Do you, with the educational program that you obviously announced yesterday, the framework, I understand it's not going to be enforced, but from what people were saying today, do you think that there's likely to be appetite to enforce members of both associations?
I think we have to take it softly. If I'd come out yesterday and said it's mandatory, it would have caused a riot. If I said it wasn't, but that's our aim, then that's the real truth. That's where we're trying to get to. But again, we need to make sure everybody supports it. And if you're a small lender and you're accepting business from an unqualified, unregulated broker who's come out of Carphone Warehouse, that's where they're always going to go. You're always going to get people in the industry. So we all need to work together. Lenders, brokers, solicitors and valuers. There's no two ways about it.
Thanks for that, Adam. Any more questions before I hit to a quick poll? No more questions? Okay, so I think it'd be worth just to see hands up whether or not we should have a specialist finance qualification. So if you're in favour of having a qualification, please put your hands up. That's pretty. And if you're not in favour, okay. And also, so all of you are in favour, it seems. Are you in favour of it being mandatory? Hands up. Okay, I think we're 2/3 of the market there. Yeah. Okay. I'm interested to know what you guys think when you go around all the stands today, like Rob said. Who will actually ask you whether or not you've got a qualification if you are brokers in the audience? Just to let you know, we're coming to a close now, but the next issue of the Bridging Commercial magazine, which is coming out on the 10th of December, the cover story will all be about the qualification. So definitely pick that up. It's free to subscribe, and you can register just at our stand on the way out. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to our lovely panelists. Have a good show, everyone.